And who will tuck him in at night?
I will accept that responsibility.
Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to the start of my Season 2 recap and reviews, beginning with The Child, where Troy gets pregnant while the crew transport a doomsday plague that gets out of control. Don't forget those spoilers ahead for this episode and the future, otherwise, enjoy. We begin Season 2 with a quick showing off of Worf and LaForge's new threads, Riker's new beard, and as Riker manoeuvres himself into a chair, we learn LaForge is now also the chief engineer, so we don't have to worry anymore about random people showing up as chief of the week. LaForge is explaining to Picard about building some kind of ultra-safe containment structure for some super deadly plasma plague they'll soon be bringing aboard. With Picard satisfied at his report, LaForge leaves and Riker also manoeuvres his way back out of the chair and takes the Enterprise to pick up the virus samples. But as the ship leaves, we see a strange light appear, enter the ship and begin zooming about from deck to deck, apparently observing those aboard before finding Troy asleep in her quarters. It seems to have found what it wants and promptly decides to go under her covers and molest her, causing her to wake up suddenly, by which time the strange light has gone inside her. Meanwhile, as LaForge oversees the construction of the containment unit and giving us his first Picard maneuver of the series, Picard is wondering where his new doctor is. It seems Dr. Beverly decided the Enterprise was too boring for her, so left for some cushy new job, and to replace her, Starfleet sent along Dr. Catherine Pulaski. But it seems Pulaski isn't too fussed with protocol and hasn't reported into Picard yet, instead finding her way to the ship's new bar set, 10 Forward. So, a now pissed off Picard personally makes his way down to confront her. After an awkward conversation with Wesley regarding him leaving the ship to join his mother, Picard arrives and we meet Guinan, the bartender, who loves her big fuck-off saucer hats, and she points out where Pulaski is. Picard starts to give her a stern bollocking, but Pulaski doesn't give a shit and tells Picard to sit the fuck down and have a listen to an obviously concerned looking Troy. Cut to our first conference meeting of the season, Picard bluntly informs everyone that Troy appears to be pregnant, much to the surprise of everyone, especially Riker. But no one is more surprised than Troy, given it appears to be a Jesus-like pregnancy, and a rather fast one at that, with Pulaski saying at its current growth rate she'll be giving birth in the next 2 days. Troy updates everyone on what she felt happened to her last night, and the crew discussed options, with Worf wanting to kill it before it can kick his ass. Troy gets a bit offended by the suggestion though, and after clearly making a mental connection with her new offspring, tells Picard she'll have this baby regardless. Eventually the Enterprise arrives in orbit and is ready to pick up the plague samples, but the chap in charge, Lieutenant Commander Hester Delt, refuses to do anything until he's inspected the containment unit, as he doesn't want to risk any chance of growth which will quickly kill everyone on the ship if it gets loose. We don't waste any time though, and as the hours go by, Troy enters labour, with Data serving as the midwife, bombarding Troy with questions while Worf and Riker look on concerned. But all goes well. Troy gives birth to a little baby boy who she names Ian Andrew after her father. Worf relaxes, Riker gives her a quick kiss, and Data thanks her for the opportunity to midwife. Later on the bridge, Pulaski updates Picard on the extremely unusual circumstances of the birth, and Picard decides it's time he goes down and pays his respects. As they arrive at her quarters though, they're shocked to find her baby is already a 4-year-old, and can even talk already. Jesus, I know they say kids grow up fast, but this is ridiculous. Meanwhile, as Ian continues to grow up fast and some extended shots of ludicrously cute puppies, Pulaski and Data finish categorizing all the samples of the plague and remind Picard just how horrifically deadly they are. Picard thanks them for the update and has Data get down to the transporter room to help O'Brien begin transporting the samples aboard. Later in Troy's quarters, Picard and Pulaski pay a visit and note how Ian seems to be trying to experience things, even allowing himself to be burned by his hot food. Pulaski wonders just who he is and what he wants from them though, so Picard decides to try the direct approach and asks him some questions about it. Ian is evasive though and says he's just not ready yet to tell them the story, and Troy suggests he needs to mature a bit more first before he's able to articulate it. Back on the bridge, Riker tells Picard that loading is complete and then sends the ship on to its destination to deliver the samples. We check in quickly at 10 Forward where Wesley is staring wistfully out at the stars, so Guinan comes over and the two have a philosophical chat about when it's okay to be selfish, or to do what's expected of you from others, and we get a nice view of the ship going into warp. But of course now it's time to put everyone in jeopardy, and after frequently reminding us just how deadly these plague samples are, the containment pod starts having some issues, and one of the samples starts growing and spreading. As everyone tries to figure out why this one particular specimen is going out of control, Hester Delt says they've got maybe 2 to 3 hours before it breaks out of the containment pod entirely. So Riker informs Picard and tells him that they should evacuate everyone they can to the saucer section just in case they need to separate. Eventually though, they work out that some kind of specific radiation is causing it to grow and that they need to find it fast. Cut to Ian going to bed and it seems he knows what's going on and that it's probably all his fault because he's some weird energy alien, so tells Troy he has to go now and promptly falls unconscious, causing Troy to freak out. Pulaski, Data and Riker arrive and Data confirms that Ian is the source of the radiation, and despite Pulaski's best attempts, Ian quickly dies. But of course he doesn't really, because he's a funky energy being, as his body transforms before them and flies into Troy's hands briefly, telepathically imparting some knowledge, and then flies off into space. LaForge then calls in to let them know that the containment system has stabilised and everyone is out of danger. Troy explains that he was a life form that was simply curious about them all and just wanted to experience life as a humanoid, never intending anyone any harm. As Troy is still rather upset, everyone awkwardly leaves the room. So the ship arrives at its destination, Hester Delt leaves, and the crew begin transporting the samples off the ship ASAP because nobody wants to keep that shit around any longer than they have to. Wesley meanwhile has a private chat with Picard and expresses his desire to stay on the ship rather than join Dr. Beverly. Picard has a think about it and then back on the bridge proceeds to tease Wesley about it, noting how with Dr. Beverly gone, others will need to take over certain duties, like Worf who volunteers to tuck him into bed at night. In the end he agrees to let him stay and tells him to take the ship off to its next destination. So we begin Season 2 with a very bland and weak episode, and it feels much like the Season 1 finale, The Neutral Zone, with two plot threads that are largely independent of each other, until the end anyway, with neither being explored or focused on in any kind of satisfactory manner. In the A plot we have Troy's unexpected child via alien impregnation, and the B plot deals with the crew transporting a series of deadly plague samples to a research outpost to cure some planet we never see or care about. There's also a third thread regarding Wesley's future on the ship after Dr. Crusher left for a new posting, which I actually liked the most, but I'll get to that in a bit. I think the weakest aspect is probably the B plot, with it only serving as an unnecessary threat of the week so Ian can die at the end. But the episode spends a great deal of time letting us know just how dangerous these samples are, and it's mostly a lot of technobabble making it even more uninteresting. I also found the crew's inability to deal with the potential containment breach very contrived. Hester Delt says the plasma plague specimen will eventually break out of the containment structure, but in an age with super durable materials and force fields, I didn't understand how this was possible, and the episode makes no attempt to explain just how it can break out. I also didn't buy the explanation of why we couldn't just jettison it into space. Hester says it'll just float about and eventually infect some other planet, but I think he forgets just how big space is, or other options like say deliberately throwing it into a sun, or even better, simply vaporizing it with a photon torpedo or two. And even if we take what he says at face value, surely you could just jettison it and keep it contained or held in a tractor beam until some way is found to deal with the situation. I mean, it's not like you have to jettison it and then just be on your way to leave it to its own fate. I just found the whole situation a little unbelievable. As for the whole Ian plot, this was a completely missed opportunity in my opinion, and this episode would have greatly benefited by simply getting rid of the plague plot entirely and focusing its full attention on Ian instead so we could really explore what this life form was trying to do. However, it really feels like we're simply rushed through his various stages of growth before he promptly dies, and only at the very end do we learn what the life form was trying to accomplish, and it all feels like an otherwise huge waste of time. It's just scene after scene of Ian developing in massive growth spurts, with Pulaski and Picard looking on concerned and commenting how unusual this all is. And as cute as those puppies were, did we need to spend so much time on them and the school scene? It's just more wasted time. Given the time constraints of a 45-minute episode, I think we should have started off with Troy perhaps already pregnant, with Ian being born in the first 5 minutes rather than halfway through the episode. That way we could have seen his rapid growth, perhaps as far as becoming an adult by the halfway point, so we can actually get to some meaty exploration of this life form and what it's trying to accomplish. It's also another missed opportunity for exploring Troy's character as well. Exploring her sudden unexpected motherhood and how she deals with it, but for the most part seems to deal with it all completely unconcerned about the whole thing. Though I think Marina Sirtis does a decent job of showing her grief towards the end at Ian's death. There's even a missed opportunity to explore the topic of abortion, as Worf suggests terminating the pregnancy to ensure the safety of the ship given the unknown alien origins, though I guess that would have been a rather controversial topic to tackle either way. A quick side note of trivia. This episode's script was originally written for the cancelled Phase 2 TV show that was initially commissioned in the late 70s, but was eventually canned and turned into the motion picture instead. The final thread dealing with Wesley is by far the best part of the episode in my opinion, as he struggles with his own desires versus what's expected of him. I like how he awkwardly tries to connect with Picard in the turbolift, but Picard is simply too distracted and annoyed by Pulaski's behaviour to really notice. And I really like the conversation between him and Guinan later. It just feels like a nice, laid-back but organic conversation between both characters, and is a great introduction for Guinan, showing off her wise, sage-like character by listening and giving advice. Though you might argue that this makes Troy somewhat redundant at her job since that's what she's supposed to do. Otherwise, this kind of stuff from Wesley is what I like to see. A young genius struggling with his life choices. The scene at the end with Picard and the others teasing him was a little corny but still fun, and I think it shows the camaraderie that has developed amongst the crew and cast members, and there's just something amusing about the idea of Worf tucking you into bed at night, perhaps reading you a bedtime story. But I'd be remiss here if we didn't talk about the biggest change of the season, and that's the introduction of Diana Muldaur as Dr. Catherine Pulaski, replacing Dr. Crusher as the Chief Medical Officer. Muldaur is no stranger to Star Trek, having guest starred in 2 episodes of TOS in the past. Behind the scenes, Gates McFadden had essentially been fired from the show as head writer and showrunner Maurice Hurley simply didn't like her or her acting. There is also suggestions that McFadden was difficult and opinionated on set, though this is refuted by Patrick Stewart and the others. McFadden herself says having come from a theatre background, she was used to simply giving her opinion and arguing a case for her character, and I think that's entirely fair and reasonable. Her replacement also created some tensions between the cast members who had grown to adore McFadden being with them, as it was felt Diana Muldaur was rather cold and distant in comparison, as well as some alleged resentment about her pay package being higher than the others. Muldaur herself stated she was disappointed with her experience on the show after initially being rather excited at being brought on board, because of all the infighting behind the scenes with the writers and producers, and also felt that the show was just too technical, with characters placed in it rather than being a show about the characters. All in all, it created a sense of awkward tension between her and everyone else, and so she will hang around for this season before Rick Berman rehired McFadden for season 3. But as for the character of Pulaski herself, she's obviously very much a McCoy-like character with a somewhat irascible, abrasive attitude, yet can still be quite sensitive towards her patients, and I have to admit, I found her character a lot more engaging than I ever did with Dr. Crusher. I know she's a somewhat divisive figure amongst Trek fans, and I can understand that given she's somewhat disrespectful to Picard's authority and is dismissive towards Data, but so far I think she's doing okay. But she needs to be something more than a McCoy clone. With Data, for example, it almost feels like they might be trying to emulate the Spock-McCoy relationship to a degree, given how often McCoy would berate Spock for his lack of feelings, and some might not like how she treats Data here. But as will come up a few times in the future, not everyone has the same regard and respect for Data as a person that others do, and quite soon we'll be tackling this subject head-on regarding his status as a machine or a living being. So while I too don't like her dismissive attitude to Data, that's only because I like Data and want him to be treated with respect, not because I feel it's bad writing. As for her disrespect to Picard's authority, this is mostly glossed over after the introduction of the pregnancy plot, but the two will clash again in the future and this will be addressed more directly. And otherwise, I think her abrasiveness adds an interesting dimension to a crew that otherwise don't get into conflict with one another. Finally, I just want to comment on some of the aesthetic changes to the season. In particular, we get 2 new sets, 10 Forward and the main shuttle bay hangar. 10 Forward is a very welcome addition to the show as it really helps sell that this is a living, breathing ship beyond our main characters, and also serves as a nice way to help our characters relax and unwind a little. The shuttle bay hangar isn't used all that often, but it's another welcome addition allowing us to explore more of this massive starship. There are some noticeable changes to the bridge sets, in particular the chairs at helm and ops are less like lounge recliners and more like actual chairs that won't destroy your back after hours of sitting in them. The captain's chair has also had an upgrade. There are also new uniforms for Worf, Geordi and Troy, and it's nice to see Geordi finally become chief engineer instead of having a chief of the week, and this will give Geordi a more solid role in the show going forward. Also, this is a very rare example of a holographic display being used in the captain's ready room on Picard's desk, something which they don't really do much of again, probably because of budgetary constraints. However, I do have a big complaint here, and this is a problem with the remastered version of the show, because someone seems to have dropped the ball on upgrading the external space shots, as the Enterprise looks a little bit more cartoonish or blurry, and the planet backdrop used for this episode was just awful, completely static and barely looks like an upgrade from its original version, compared to some of the lovely, detailed look of the planets in Season 1's restoration. It seems a different company was hired to restore Season 2, and it looks like they may have cut some corners in order to do their job. Ultimately though, this is a rather disappointing episode and doesn't feel like we've gotten out of our Season 1 rut just yet, but hopefully things will improve soon. Next time, the crew encounter an unusual region of space and end up being lab rats for a godlike being in the episode Where Silence Has Lease. Please feel free to leave any comments or feedback, and if you liked this episode then please do like, subscribe and share. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.